My name is Ethan Walker, and I never imagined that the happiest day of my life would become the moment I walked away from everything I thought I wanted. It was a bright morning in Vermont at St. Andrew's Chapel, beautifully decorated with white flowers and soft golden light passing through stained glass windows. Nearly 200 guests filled the church while I stood at the altar wearing a charcoal suit, trying to control the nervous weight in my chest. My mother, Linda Walker, 67 years old, sat quietly in the front row wearing a simple navy dress she had made herself. Her hands were rough from decades of working at Maple Ridge Farm, land that had been in our family for generations. She had driven 3 hours just to be there, and even though she tried to hide it, I could see she felt out of place among people who lived in a completely different world. On the opposite side sat Victoria Hayes and her wealthy family, polished, distant, and proud. Her father wore an expensive suit, her mother carried herself with a kind of superiority that never needed words. From the beginning of our relationship, I always felt like I was being observed, tested, judged quietly but constantly. The ceremony began and everything seemed perfect. Victoria walked down the aisle in a designer gown that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than real life. When she reached me, she smiled, and for a moment I believed everything was exactly as it should be. We exchanged vows, promises were made, and when I kissed her at the altar, the church erupted in applause. For a brief moment, I felt complete, as if all the struggles of my life had finally led me to the right place. But perfection never survives reality for long. During the receiving line, guests came forward to congratulate us while my mother patiently waited at the end, as she always did in life, never demanding attention. When she finally reached us, she hugged me first with warmth and love, the familiar scent of lavender soap and earth reminding me of every sacrifice she had ever made. Then she turned to Victoria with open arms, expecting nothing more than a simple embrace. Instead, Victoria stepped back. Her face twisted in disgust and she spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear that my mother smelled like a barn and should be kept away from her. The room went silent instantly. Some people laughed nervously, not understanding the damage they were witnessing. My mother's arms slowly fell to her sides, her face draining of color, but she said nothing. She never argued, never defended herself, she simply stood there absorbing humiliation in silence. Something inside me broke in that moment. I looked at Victoria and suddenly didn't recognize her anymore. I quietly told her to take off the ring and ended the wedding in front of 200 guests. She laughed at first, thinking I was joking, but when she realized I was serious, confusion turned into panic. I told her the wedding was over and that she had just shown me exactly who she was. Then I turned to my mother and told her we were leaving. We walked out of St. Andrew's Chapel together while whispers followed behind us like echoes of disbelief. The drive back to Maple Ridge Farm was silent. My mother sat beside me staring out the window, holding her hands tightly together, trying to contain emotions she refused to show. When we arrived home, the sun was setting over fields that had shaped our entire lives. My phone began ringing immediately, first Victoria, then her family, then message after message filled with confusion, anger, and panic. But one message from Victoria's sister stood out, warning me that something deeper had been happening behind my back. I called her and what I learned changed everything. Victoria had been planning for months. She had been speaking to lawyers about controlling family assets after marriage, asking questions about my mother's independence and future, not out of care but calculation. She believed my mother was a burden, something to be managed and removed from the picture. But what she didn't know was the second truth I discovered that night. My mother was not just a simple farmer. Maple Ridge Farm was worth over $11 million with agricultural contracts generating massive income, something she had hidden her entire life not out of secrecy but humility, because she never wanted money to change how people treated her or us. As I sat in my father's old chair reading documents, I realized Victoria hadn't just insulted my mother, she had been planning to take control of her life entirely. When I confronted her over the phone, her tone changed from arrogance to desperation. She tried to justify everything as misunderstandings, claiming she was only trying to secure our future, but I told her clearly that she hadn't made a mistake, she had made a choice. And that choice revealed everything about her character. I ended the call. In the following days, everything collapsed for her. Evidence surfaced, documents were exposed, and the full extent of her plan became clear. Legal authorities became involved, and what she thought was a carefully built future turned into complete destruction. Meanwhile, my mother remained calm, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she had already lived a life where dignity mattered more than revenge. Months later, life began to rebuild itself. I met someone new, someone who valued character over status, someone who saw my family for what it truly was rather than what it could provide. She once told me that real love never separates you from your roots, it respects them. And I finally understood what I should have known from the beginning. Respect is not something earned after proving value, it is something given at the very beginning when someone shows you what matters most. My mother still lives on Maple Ridge Farm, still working the land she loves, but now she lives with something she never asked for but finally deserved: recognition. And as I look back, I realize the truth: love without respect is not love at all, and anyone who cannot honor your family was never meant to be part of your future. After I ended the call with Victoria, I expected silence, but instead everything escalated faster than I imagined. By the next morning, rumors had already spread through our town in Vermont about what happened at St. Andrew's Chapel. Some called it a scandal, others called it courage, but none of that mattered to me anymore. What mattered was what was still hidden beneath the surface. My mother, Linda Walker, never spoke much about money or land, and even after everything that had happened, she remained calm, continuing her routine at Maple Ridge Farm as if the world hadn't just tried to crush her dignity. But I could see it in her eyes that something had shifted, not anger, not fear, but disappointment in how easily people judged others without understanding them. That morning, while she was tending to the kitchen, my phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. It was Victoria's father, Robert Hayes, a man whose voice always carried authority, but now it sounded different, controlled panic hiding behind forced politeness. He tried to explain that everything had been a misunderstanding, that emotions had gotten out of hand, and that I was destroying something valuable over one incident. But I stopped him and told him very clearly that this was not one incident, it was a pattern, and that his daughter had revealed exactly who she was the moment she thought she had power over someone else's family. He went silent for a moment before shifting the conversation, suggesting that maybe we could resolve things privately, but I refused. Because by then, I had already learned the truth he didn't know I knew yet. Victoria wasn't just cruel in words, she had been strategic for months. Behind my back, she had contacted legal consultants, asked questions about inheritance structures, and even discussed ways to gain influence over family property once we were married. She saw my mother not as a person, but as an obstacle. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't heartbreak. It was exposure. While this was unfolding, my mother finally sat me down in the kitchen and told me something she had kept hidden for most of her life. Maple Ridge Farm was not just farmland, it was a legacy property, valued at over $11 million, with agricultural contracts, land rights, and long-term agreements that had been carefully built over decades. She never told me because she didn't want wealth to change how I saw life or how others treated us. She believed in living simply even when life was not simple at all. That revelation didn't shock me as much as it clarified everything. Victoria had not just insulted a farmer's wife, she had insulted someone whose life she never bothered to understand. Within days, the situation escalated legally. Evidence began surfacing. Messages, emails, and conversations that showed Victoria had been actively planning to secure control over family assets under the assumption that my mother was vulnerable and dependent. Lawyers got involved, and what she thought was a private advantage turned into a public exposure of intent. When Victoria finally contacted me again, her voice was no longer confident. It was fragmented. Desperate, trying to rewrite the past as misunderstanding and emotional stress. She asked me to forget everything, to come back, to give her another chance to explain herself properly, but I told her there was nothing left to explain. Her actions had already spoken louder than any apology could. And for the first time, she realized she had lost control of a situation she thought she had already won. Over the following weeks, everything around her collapsed. Her reputation, her family's standing, and her sense of certainty. But for me, there was no satisfaction in watching that fall. There was only clarity. Because the real victory was not in revenge, it was in understanding what I should have seen earlier, that respect is not something someone develops after convenience, it is something they either carry or they don't. Months later, life moved forward in a different direction. I met people who didn't ask what I owned before they decided how to treat me. I met someone who understood that value is not in appearance or status, but in character and consistency. And slowly, life stopped feeling like a test I had to pass. My mother continued living at Maple Ridge Farm, unchanged in her habits but stronger in presence, no longer invisible in the way she had been before. And as I stood one evening watching the land that had shaped our entire family, I realized something deeply simple. Some people enter your life to stay, and some enter to reveal truth. Victoria was never meant to build a future with me, she was only meant to show me what kind of future I should never allow again. And that is why I let her go completely, without regret, without anger, and without looking back. The biggest weakness in life is not whether a person is rich or poor, but when they treat others with arrogance and disrespect. Every relationship is built more on respect than love. If someone cannot respect your parents or elders, then they do not truly respect you either. Parents are the ones who sacrifice their lives, comfort, and dreams to raise us. Respecting them is not just good manners, it is the foundation of true humanity. Anyone who looks down on another person's parents is lowering their own character. Real strength is not found in wealth, status, or appearance, but in humility, kindness, and respectful behavior. A person who stays humble earns lasting respect, while arrogance slowly destroys a person's reputation and relationships. One important truth to always remember is that a person's real character is revealed not by their words, but by their behavior, especially when they feel angry or superior. And the most important lesson is to never rush into decisions about relationships. Always observe how a person treats those who are weaker, older, or less privileged, because that reveals their true nature far more than their appearance or lifestyle. Light bulb short summary. Respect must be mutual in every relationship. Arrogance destroys love and trust. Respect for parents and elders is a mark of true character. Real value lies in behavior, not wealth. Always judge people by their actions, not their image.